always loved music, and I grew up with, my sister Bobby played piano, and so at the same time my granddad gave me an old harmony guitar. I've been writing poems since I was 7 or 8 years old.
At 92, Willie Nelson is still alive, but the truth of his final years will shock you.
Well, I like a lot of different kinds of music. I had a variety of music that I really, truly liked. So I tried to learn everything I could.
Behind the smile and the music lies a story of pain, loss, and survival that will break your heart. If you are a father, you will feel his pain more than anyone else. What happened to him now will leave you in tears. Try not to cry when you see this. A child left behind. Born in Abbott, Texas in 1933, Willie's story didn't begin with comfort or security. It began with loss. His mother vanished without leaving an explanation, her absence carving a wound that would never fully heal. His father soon remarried, drifting out of his children's lives as though they were pieces from a past he no longer wanted to carry. For Willie and his sister Bobby, there was no warm home waiting. There were only their grandparents, who stepped in to raise them with what little they had. The grandparents gave love in the way they knew how, but it wasn't enough to fill the cracks of poverty or the emptiness of being left behind. Willie's grandfather, a blacksmith with rough hands and a steady heart, was the one who gave him his first guitar. That moment was more than a gift. It was a lifeline. In the small Texas town where days felt long and nights felt even longer, that guitar became Willie's only companion. The one thing that promised he could make sense of the ache inside him. But tragedy came too soon. When Willie was just 6, pneumonia stole his grandfather away. The man who had been his anchor was suddenly gone, and the silence that followed was unbearable. Willie would lie awake at night, feeling the weight of loneliness press against his chest. His grandmother tried to keep the family together, but grief filled every corner of their small home. The guitar, once a symbol of joy, became the place where he buried his sorrow. He played not to entertain, but to survive. Each note a conversation with a world that seemed determined to forget him. Music became his way of speaking when no one else would listen. While other children were running through fields or laughing in classrooms, Willie sat with his guitar, writing songs that carried the weight of someone far older than his years. He didn't just strum chords. He confessed, he cried, he questioned. Every melody was a thread stitching him back together after life kept tearing him apart. The loneliness that might have broken another child instead lit a fire in him. It gave him a hunger to be heard, a need to tell stories that could reach beyond Abbott, beyond Texas, and into the hearts of people everywhere. But what happens when a child grows up with nothing but silence to fill? Does it crush him into nothing, or does it force him to create a voice so powerful the world has no choice but to listen? Let's find out. The Road of Desperation. At just 9 years old, he was already performing for strangers, not because he dreamed of the spotlight, but because survival left him no choice. The coins dropped into his case or slipped into his pocket meant food on the table and shoes that would last another season. Childhood was a luxury he never had. As he grew older, the struggle only deepened. His teenage years were spent in cotton fields under a blistering Texas sun, his hands raw and cut from endless labor. When he wasn't in the fields, he took whatever work he could find. He trimmed trees until his arms ached. He knocked on doors selling encyclopedias that nobody wanted, feeling the sting of rejection long before the music industry would serve him a harsher dose. He scrubbed dishes in greasy diners, smelling of soap and sweat, wondering if his songs would ever mean anything beyond the walls of his own mind. Every job was about survival, never choice. For Willie, the dream of Nashville was the one thing that kept him moving. The city was painted as a place where broken men turned into stars, where songs lifted people from rags to riches. But when he finally made it there, the doors didn't open. They slammed shut. To the polished executives and polished singers, he was too raw. His voice was too rough, his clothes too plain, his pockets too empty. They didn't see a rising star. They saw another poor man who didn't belong. At his lowest, the weight of despair almost crushed him. One night, overcome with hopelessness, Willie laid himself down in the middle of a busy street. He didn't care if a car came. He didn't care if it ended. He felt unseen, unwanted, invisible, in a world that only seemed to reward people who were nothing like him. The silence of that moment was louder than any song he had ever written. But fate has a strange way of stepping in. A truck driver spotted him and pulled over, offering him $10 for odd help. It was not much, but it was enough to remind Willie that life could still surprise him, that even in his darkest moment, a stranger's kindness could pull him back from the edge. That small act of generosity became a lifeline, proof that maybe he was not entirely invisible. He had survived the bars, the fields, and the hunger, but the cruelest battle came when his own songs soared to the top of the charts, only with someone else's voice. The invisible songwriter. Nashville was supposed to be the city where dreams bloomed, but for Willie, it became a city of closed doors. Along with doing odd jobs, he carried a guitar, a notebook full of songs, and the weight of feeding a family. Those songs poured from a life that had seen loss, poverty, and too many lonely nights. But in the offices of Nashville producers, none of that seemed to matter. He looked too plain, sounded too raw, and they didn't believe he could ever sell records. Still, Willie wrote, it was the only thing he knew how to do. When money ran out, desperation forced him to sell one of his songs, Family Bible. He let it go for $100, the price of groceries and rent, for a little while. Soon after, the song became a hit, only not with his name on it. For everyone else, it was a hymn of hope. For Willie, it was a reminder that survival came at the cost of recognition. He had written something powerful enough to touch the world, but the world never knew it was his. More songs followed, and each one carried a piece of his heart. Crazy, sung by Patsy Cline, became one of the most beloved ballads in country music. Funny How Time Slips Away, given to Billy Walker, spoke to the quiet ache of lost love. Pretty Paper, performed by Roy Orbison, painted images of holiday streets and lonely souls. Each song reached the top, each became a classic, but none of them carried Willie's face, his voice, or his story. Producers told him to cut his hair, to dress better, to smooth out the roughness in his voice. They wanted polish, but Willie had only scars. His sound wasn't built for the radio they knew. His life didn't fit the mold they wanted to sell. To them, he was valuable only as a pen, not as a performer. It was a strange kind of heartbreak to build the careers of others while struggling to build his own. He was proud of the songs, proud of the way they connected with people, but he carried the ache of being left out of the very world he helped shape. Nashville had taken his words and turned them into gold, yet it left him in the shadows, watching everyone else shine. But rejection can do something dangerous to a man. It can crush him, or it can light a fire that refuses to die. For Willie, every slammed door, every stolen spotlight, every producer who told him, "You're not enough," became fuel. Sometimes being shut out is the very push needed to burn the rule book. Let's tell you what happens when rejection becomes rebellion, and how he faced personal life crisis. The rise of the outlaw. In 1952, Willie married for the first time. He was just a young man then, chasing small-town gigs and trying to keep food on the table. That marriage, like many early loves born in struggle, didn't last. Heartache followed him, and in 1963, he married again, this time to Shirley Colley, a singer who shared his world of music but also his hardships. By the time the 60s were fading, Willie had walked away from 2 marriages and found himself tied to his third, with Connie Kepke. With her, he tried to build not only a family, but also a future that looked more secure than the drifting years behind him. In 1969, hoping to settle down and give his children stability, Willie bought a ranch near Nashville. It was more than land and buildings. It was a dream, a place where he could escape the cutthroat music business, raise his kids, and live the quiet life he'd been denied since childhood. He poured himself into it, believing he had finally found something solid. For a man who had known so much loss, the ranch was proof that maybe life could give as well as take. But the dream didn't last. His marriage to Connie began to fall apart under the strain of constant touring, money troubles, and his restless spirit. Then tragedy struck. The ranch burned down. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built as a home for his family, vanished in smoke and flames. It felt like life was stripping him bare again. With his marriage collapsing and his home gone, Willie left Nashville behind. He went back to Texas, returning not as a rising star, but as a man who had been broken down to almost nothing. Yet, in that ruin lay a kind of freedom. Nashville's expectations no longer weighed on him. He had lost what tethered him there, and now he was free to chase music his way. In Austin, he found a city that welcomed misfits. There, long-haired hippies and rugged cowboys gathered in the same bars, both searching for music that spoke to something real. Willie, with his unpolished voice and raw honesty, was exactly what they had been waiting for. He didn't need sequins or smooth edges. He sang with the scars of a man who had lived hard and loved deeply, and people felt it. This was the birth of a new chapter. Willie began recording albums that didn't play by Nashville's rules. Shotgun Willie showed his willingness to confront life's grit head-on, while Red-Headed Stranger became an unlikely masterpiece. Sparse, haunting, and unlike anything on the radio, the album told a story that listeners couldn't shake off. Critics thought it was too strange, too bare. Fans thought otherwise. It became a classic, proving that the rules Nashville clung to were not the only way to reach people's hearts. Willie was no longer alone in this rebellion. He found kinship with Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson, and others who were also tired of Nashville's chains. Together, they recorded Wanted, the Outlaws. The album wasn't just successful, it made history as the first country record to go platinum. Suddenly, the men Nashville had dismissed were leading a revolution. They weren't country's outsiders anymore. They were rewriting the very identity of the genre. But more than albums or platinum records, what made Willie an outlaw was his spirit. He refused to conform, and in doing so, he gave voice to millions of people who felt like they didn't belong. His long hair, his bandanas, his easy smile, all became symbols of freedom, of breaking away from tradition without losing the soul of the music. But just as the outlaw was rising, another storm was forming on the horizon. Because even as the world sang his songs, forces beyond the stage were preparing to strip him of nearly everything. When the IRS came knocking. By the early 1990s, Willie Nelson was a legend. His voice had carried him from dusty Texas bars to the biggest stages in America. But behind the music, a storm was brewing that would nearly destroy everything he had built. The IRS came forward with a staggering claim. Willie owed $16.7 million in unpaid taxes. It wasn't just a number on paper. For Willie, it meant the government was ready to strip away every piece of his life. Agents showed no mercy. They swooped in and seized his ranch, his recording studio, and even the most personal treasures he owned. Among them was his guitar, a battered Martin he called Trigger, the one companion that had been with him through decades of heartbreak and triumph. To most people, it was just an instrument. To Willie, it was family. Watching strangers take it away felt like watching someone steal a piece of his soul. For a man who had faced rejection, poverty, and personal loss, this was a new kind of humiliation. The headlines made it worse. Suddenly, his private pain became public shame. The world knew Willie Nelson, the outlaw, the star, the voice of freedom. But now, they saw a man drowning under debts too large to imagine. Yet Willie was never the kind of man to fold under pressure. Instead of running, he turned to the only thing that had ever saved him: music. He came up with an idea that no one saw coming. He would record an album called The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories, and sell it directly to fans. Not in record stores, but through late-night infomercials that ran across American television. It was strange, it was desperate, but it was pure Willie, turning hardship into song, pain into connection. Slowly, painfully, he chipped away at the massive debt. With each payment, he reclaimed a piece of himself. In time, he got back Trigger, the guitar that had survived so many storms with him. Holding it again was like holding hope. Willie hadn't just paid off a debt. He had proven that dignity could be restored, even when the world tried to strip it away. The outlaw had beaten the IRS, not with lawyers or loopholes, but with music and the loyalty of people who believed in him. It was one more chapter in a life defined by resilience. Willie had faced hardship with courage and even clawed his way out of financial ruin, but he didn't know that nature itself was preparing to strike a blow he would never fully recover from. The wounds that never heal. On Christmas Day in 1991, Willie Nelson's world shattered. His firstborn son, Billy, was gone. The news came with a weight so heavy that even a man who had survived abandonment, heartbreak, financial ruin, and endless struggles could barely stand beneath it. Willie would later say it was the most devastating moment of his life. No words, no song, no melody could capture the depth of that pain. For a man whose guitar had always been his voice, grief suddenly felt unspeakable. Billy had been more than just a son. He was a reminder of Willie's early years, of choices and sacrifices that had shaped their lives. To lose him, and on Christmas Day, turned what should have been a time of joy into a permanent wound. From that moment on, Christmas carried not light, but a hollow ache, a silence that could not be filled. Fans noticed the change. In concerts, in interviews, in recordings, there were moments when Willie's voice seemed to falter, not from age, but from sorrow. His pauses grew longer, his tone softer, as though he carried a ghost with him each time he stepped onto a stage. The songs were still there, but behind them was a father who had been broken in a way that time could not mend. Yet Willie did what he had always done when faced with loss. He kept singing. He poured his grief into his music, letting the weight of his sorrow slip into the spaces between notes. For his fans, those songs became more than entertainment. They became lessons in resilience, in carrying pain without letting it silence you. Willie showed that grief could be reshaped into poetry, that music could give voice to the wounds that words could not. As the years passed, age brought its own shadows. At 92, Willie's body carries the marks of time. His hands move slower across the guitar. His breath catches more often. His frame leans a little heavier. But the fire inside him remains. He still walks on stage with the same battered guitar, trigger, and still sings as if each performance might be the last. To his fans, every concert feels like a gift, a chance to witness not just a musician, but a survivor. Willie Nelson is more than a country singer. He is living proof that a man can be bent but not broken, that pain does not have to end in silence. From a child abandoned in Abbott, Texas, to an outlaw who rewrote country music, to a father who still carries the loss of his son, his life has been a story of wounds that never fully heal, but still find a way to sing. Willie Nelson's story is one of music, pain, and survival, a man who turned heartbreak into timeless songs. But how do you see his journey and the tragedies he carried through life? Share your thoughts in the comments.